My name is Evelyn, and a few months ago, a complete stranger told me I was too old to be a good human being. That's a hard thing to hear when you've been on this earth for 7 decades and you've dedicated half of those years to quiet, selfless service. It happened at the Sunny Meadows Animal Shelter. I had gone there with a simple checkbook and an open heart, ready to adopt a dog named Max. Max was a scruffy, gentle soul with kind, worried eyes. He was a distinguished gentleman of a terrier mix who had been overlooked because he wasn't a young puppy. I knew exactly how Max felt. I sat across the desk from a young woman named Sarah. She looked barely old enough to vote, yet she held my happiness, and Max's, in her hands. She was wearing a lanyard and an air of professional superiority. I watched her tap her pen on my application form, then slowly circle the line that read, age 72. The small talk ended right there. Evelyn, she started, but the way she said my name, it wasn't friendly. It was like she was addressing a piece of furniture that might soon fall apart. Evelyn, I seem lovely, but I have to be blunt. It's our policy to consider the long-term well-being of the animal. I felt the familiar sting of the invisible wall they put up around you after a certain age. Max is a senior dog, Sarah. I'm a senior citizen. It's a perfect match. I live in a quiet neighborhood, my finances are secure, and I'm home all day. I have a clean bill of health. She pushed a clipboard across the desk. With all due respect, ma'am, a clean bill of health today doesn't guarantee a clean bill of health tomorrow. We can't risk him outliving his owner. We just need a caregiver with a predictable future. Predictable future. That was the line that shattered my composure. That was the insult. It wasn't about Max's safety. It was about the societal narrative that screams that after a certain age, your capacity for life, for love, and for responsibility suddenly expires. She wasn't questioning my dedication. She was questioning my relevance. My hands were shaking, and I didn't know if it was from anger or the sudden, sharp pain of being minimized. I looked over her shoulder at Max, sitting quietly in his kennel. He wasn't barking or struggling. He was just waiting patiently for someone to choose him. And I realized this wasn't just about me needing a dog. This was about proving that the wisdom and strength of my generation hadn't expired. I took a deep breath. Sarah, I said, looking her straight in the eye, I understand your policy, but before you write denied across this paper, you need to hear something. I have a 30-year-old secret, a secret that, if you knew it, would prove I am far more capable of handling Max's future than anyone else who has walked through this door today. That got her attention. She stopped tapping her pen. Her professional mask cracked just a fraction. A secret, Evelyn? What kind of secret could possibly relate to adopting a dog today? Are you saying you're wealthy? It relates to commitment, Sarah. To facing down impossible odds. To making sacrifices that would break most people. And it all started back in 1993 with a simple cold snap and a man who was running for his life. It was the first week of December, 1993. It was one of those bitter Pennsylvania winters where the cold got into the bones of the houses. The recession was hitting hard, and my husband, Robert, had just lost his job at the steel mill. But the real problem wasn't the bills or the cold. The real problem was a man named Mr. Peterson, who lived 3 streets over. Mr. Peterson had been running what he called a backyard breeder operation, a fancy name for a puppy mill. He was cheap, he was cruel, and when he finally skipped town to escape his debtors, he didn't just leave his debt behind. He left 52 dogs locked in those freezing makeshift kennels. 52 living, breathing creatures whimpering in the cold, abandoned like scrap metal. I knew the minute I heard that weak, desperate noise drifting across the silent neighborhood that I had a choice. I could follow the law, call the authorities, and wait 2 weeks for the underfunded county services to respond, or I could risk everything. Our last bit of savings, our reputation, even Robert's freedom to save them. The local news barely covered it, another unfortunate casualty of the recession. But to me, they weren't casualties. They were lives. And they were starving. I walked back into my house. I looked at Robert. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the newspaper clipping about the mill closure. And when I told him, his first reaction wasn't compassion. It was terror. Evelyn, we're broke. We can't even feed ourselves properly. We cannot risk getting involved with Peterson's legal mess. He was right, of course. Robert was a practical man. I, however, had just seen 52 abandoned eyes. I put my hand down on the newspaper. Robert, I told him, you're worried about our future. I'm worried about their survival. Sometimes you have to choose humanity over practicality. I grabbed the keys to the old Ford pickup. I didn't wait for his permission. I drove to a hardware store in the next county where they wouldn't know me, and I started buying dog food. Bags and bags of it. That night, under the cover of a thick, swirling snowstorm, I broke the lock on Mr. Peterson's kennel fence. That was the beginning. That was the start of the 30-year-old secret. And that, Sarah, is why you cannot tell me I am not capable.
I left Sarah sitting there in the shelter, staring at me, wondering if I was a savior or just crazy. But my mind was already back in 1993, in that miserable, freezing kennel yard. 52 dogs. Not 52 personalities, just 52 mouths to feed, 52 bodies to keep warm, and 52 sources of noise that could expose me to the whole town. When I broke that lock and those dogs realized they had a moment of freedom, the chaos was deafening. They were terrified, malnourished, and desperate. Every bark, every whimper sounded like a siren telling the sheriff exactly where to find the evidence of my breaking and entering. The first challenge wasn't feeding them. It was silence. I had to get them out of Peterson's yard without alerting the neighbors, who were already suspicious of any strange movements in their recession-hit streets. I loaded them into the back of Robert's old truck, a dozen at a time, covering them with worn-out blankets and driving them straight back to my own home. Robert was standing in the garage, wearing his worn steel mill jacket. When I opened the back of the truck and the first pitiful dog whimpered out, he didn't shout. He just dropped his head into his hands. "Evelyn, 52? We can't even afford the gas bill this month. What have you done?" I told him the truth, the only truth that mattered. I did what had to be done. We may be broke, Robert, but we are not cruel. If you can't help me, just stay out of my way. But Robert was a good man, even if he was practical to a fault. He looked at those dogs, scared, shivering, clinging to each other, and the fight drained out of him. He grabbed a shovel, and we got to work turning our detached garage and the small potting shed into a makeshift shelter. We used every piece of spare lumber, every threadbare rug, and every ounce of common sense we had to create a warm, dark place for them to hide. But I knew this was too big for just us. You can't handle a crisis of this magnitude without backup. You can't be a capable human being without knowing when to ask for help, and more importantly, who to ask. My first ally was Mrs. Helen Henderson. She was a retired vet tech who lived 3 towns over. Helen wasn't talkative. She was efficient. She had the knowledge I lacked, and she understood the necessity of absolute silence. I called her in the dead of night and told her the situation without apology. She paused for a long time. Then she said, "Evelyn, 52 dogs. That's an awful lot of secrets." "It's 52 lives, Helen. Can you help me?" Helen's reply was the lifeline that saved me. "I'll be there before dawn, but you have to promise me one thing. Never use your phone. We talk in person, or we don't talk at all. This cannot be traced." With Helen's help, we created a system. This is the part Sarah at the shelter didn't understand. Capability isn't just about lifting a bag of food. It's about logistics, discretion, and scheduling. We created 3 separate feeding teams, recruited from a tiny trusted network of 2 friends who were also struggling financially. They never saw the whole operation. They only knew they were dropping supplies off at a secret recovery place. Helen set up a triage system in the potting shed to treat the sickest animals: parvo, respiratory infections, malnutrition. We had to buy veterinary supplies in cash, always from a different county, always using code words. The financial strain was immediate and brutal. The meager savings Robert and I had were gone within a week, spent on antibiotics and high-quality puppy chaw. I started making long-distance calls to out-of-state rescue organizations, lying about where the animals were coming from, promising them proof of health later. I was running an underground animal rescue system out of my garage. I was an underground conductor, only instead of a railway, I was running an animal rescue system. I risked my home. I risked Robert's quiet trust, and I risked what little reputation we had left in Harmony. But when you face a challenge that demands all of you, you find a strength you didn't know you possessed. You find others who share that unacknowledged compassion. If you too have ever faced a life challenge that required you to put your own safety or resources on the line for someone else, a family member, a neighbor, or a helpless animal, take a moment and share that story in the comments. We seniors know that true commitment rarely comes with fanfare or trophies. We managed the chaos for 2 weeks. 52 mouths were being fed, the sick were recovering, and Helen had managed to quietly transport the first dozen dogs out of state. We thought we were safe. We thought the silence of the snow and the recession was covering us. Then one Tuesday morning, just as Robert was pulling the old Ford into the driveway after a shift looking for work, he saw the car. A big, dark sedan parked 2 houses down. It didn't look like it belonged in Harmony. And sitting inside, staring intently at our house, was a man in a cheap suit and a fedora. It wasn't the police. It was worse. It was one of Mr. Peterson's creditors. And he'd come looking for collateral. The man in the cheap suit was a private investigator hired by Peterson's creditors. He wasn't looking for animals. He was looking for anything of value Peterson might have left behind: cash, equipment, anything to settle the debt. If he found 52 dogs and the evidence that we had broken into the kennels, the legal fallout would have ruined us. Robert would have been dragged into it, and we would have lost our house. We had to become invisible. For weeks, we lived like ghosts. I only drove the old pickup after dark, swapping out garbage cans in the middle of the night so the waste didn't look unusual. Helen Henderson, the retired vet tech, switched her routine entirely. She used the service roads and parked her car 2 blocks away, walking the rest of the way with her medical bag disguised as a huge purse. The financial strain wasn't just bills. It was deep personal sacrifice. The antibiotic treatments for the kennel cough and the specific nutritional needs for the malnourished dogs quickly depleted our savings. Robert and I looked at each other one night, sitting at the kitchen table, and we both knew what had to go next. I went into the safe and took out the one thing I had kept since I was a girl, my grandmother's antique gold locket.
It wasn't worth a fortune, but it was irreplaceable. It was the only piece of jewelry I ever wore. I drove to a pawn shop an hour away, sold it for a fraction of its sentimental worth, and walked out with just enough cash to buy 3 weeks' worth of high-protein dog food. Robert, bless him, just squeezed my hand. He had stopped arguing. He had seen the commitment, and his fear had slowly been replaced by a quiet, deep respect. He saw the truth. I wasn't just feeding animals. I was standing up for a value system that the recession was trying to crush. We managed the logistics for nearly 3 months, slowly getting the healthier dogs placed through Helen's network. Then, the inevitable happened. We had a major health crisis. One morning, I found 3 of the younger puppies lethargic, feverish, and terribly sick. Parvo. It's highly contagious, highly lethal, and spreads like wildfire in close quarters. It was a terrifying setback. If the infection wasn't contained immediately, we would lose dozens of animals and all the sacrifice would have been for nothing. Helen worked around the clock, barely sleeping. I became her surgical nurse, holding IV bags and cleaning kennels that seemed perpetually fouled. I couldn't risk taking a day off. I couldn't call in sick. I certainly couldn't explain to a doctor why I was smelling strongly of bleach and antiseptic. I was isolating myself from the entire world to save 52 lives. It was a loneliness I wouldn't wish on anyone. You carry the burden alone, because if you share it, you risk not only exposure, but rejection. You risk people looking at you and asking, why is she sacrificing so much for dogs? We all have moments in life that define who we are, moments that demanded we walk away from comfort or connection to do the right thing. If you've ever had to sacrifice something deeply personal, be it a family event, a vacation, or a prized possession, to fulfill a greater moral commitment, share your experience below. It is in those quiet moments of sacrifice that true senior wisdom is forged. We fought off the parvo, saving all but 2 of the infected puppies. It felt like a monumental victory. But victories attract attention, and attention was the one thing we couldn't afford. The PI eventually gave up, but the threat shifted closer to home. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was a notorious busybody. She didn't suspect a dog rescue operation. She suspected something worse, in her mind: business. She started noticing the strange patterns, the lights in the garage, the unusual traffic late at night, and the fact that I was doing all my shopping in cash. One afternoon, I was pulling the mail out of the box when she cornered me. She didn't look at the house. She looked right at me, her eyes narrow and cold. "Evelyn," she whispered, her voice like gravel. "I don't know what kind of black market operation you and Robert are running, but I've got friends on the city council, and if I find out you're hiding anything illegal from this town, I won't hesitate to call the newspaper." Mrs. Gable's threat was far more dangerous than the private investigator. The PI wanted money. Mrs. Gable wanted drama and vindication. She wanted to prove that something underhanded was happening on her clean street. I couldn't admit to running a massive underground rescue. I couldn't even hint at it. So I had to confront her with a lie that was easier for her to swallow. I leaned in close to her over the mailbox and said, "Mrs. Gable, you're right. Robert and I are desperate. He lost his job. We've been running a small, quiet operation, selling antique furniture we buy at auctions. It's cash only because we're trying to avoid paperwork until we're back on our feet." That was the crucial pivot. It fed her suspicion, but it reframed the risk from criminal activity to financial desperation, a sin she understood in 1993. It was a secret she could keep, or leak for her own social gain. I had traded the truth for silence. I told her that if she leaked anything, she would ruin a struggling couple just trying to make ends meet. She walked away, satisfied that she had something on me, but bound by a common, shameful secret. That incident cemented the isolation. For the entire spring, Robert and I were closed off. We became experts at saying no. No to coffee with neighbors, no to church picnics, no to every genuine human connection that could accidentally expose our operation. The personal cost of that silence was enormous. It wasn't just the money or the missing family events. It was the emotional distance from our own lives. We couldn't talk about our success. We couldn't share the genuine relief when a sick puppy found a loving home. We had performed a miracle, but we had to bury it deeper than any secret in town. I remember the day the last of the 52 dogs, a gentle old shepherd mix named Shadow, was loaded into Helen's van, destined for a retirement home in Vermont. I stood in the empty garage, which smelled strongly of disinfectant and regret. The crisis was over. We had saved them all. I looked at Robert, and we didn't hug or celebrate. We were just two people who had survived a quiet war. We returned to a normal life, but the experience had fundamentally changed me. I understood then that society often measures your worth by what you display, your job, your car, your social circle. But true competence is measured by what you endure when no one is watching. And I realized I needed proof, not for others, but for myself. I knew that one day my sacrifice, my capability would be dismissed because of my age. I needed a shield against that future. So I gathered everything: Helen's meticulously detailed veterinary logs, the receipts for the sold locket, and the endless bags of food, the newspaper clippings about Peterson's arrest. I took a plain, leather-bound book, an old accounting journal, and I logged every single detail, every difficult day, every quiet success. It was a complete, irrefutable record of my commitment. I didn't keep it to brag. I kept it because I knew the day would come when a young woman with a clipboard would question my capacity to care simply because of my wrinkles. And I would need to show her my hidden history. And that day was today. I looked up at Sarah, the young shelter counselor. Her face was still set in that stubborn, polite refusal. She had heard my incredible story, a story of financial ruin, 52 animals, and immense personal risk, and she was still not convinced. The only thing she saw was a 72-year-old woman with a predictable future. I reached into the large canvas bag at my feet, the bag where I kept my wallet, my reading glasses, and the one precious leather-bound volume I had carried with me for 30 years, my insurance policy against ignorance. My hand closed around the cool, smooth leather. The moment had arrived. The final piece of the story wasn't the past event itself. It was the proof. It was the confrontation between my quiet history and her arrogant present. I pulled the book out and placed it on the desk between us. This is what you call a predictable future, Sarah, I whispered, tapping the cover. This is the 30-year-old record of a woman you thought was too frail to adopt a single dog. I watched Sarah's eyes. She was still reeling from the story of the 52 abandoned dogs, but the real test was whether she would believe the words of an old woman or the cold, hard facts of the record. I opened the leather-bound book and gently turned it toward her. This, I stated clearly, is my 30-year logbook. This isn't a diary of emotion, Sarah. This is an accounting journal. Sarah leaned forward, her skepticism fighting with her professional curiosity. She didn't see scattered notes. She saw columns and headers, all written in meticulous, familiar handwriting. Page 1, December 8, 1993. It detailed the exact cubic feet of the Peterson kennels and the calculated minimum caloric needs for each breed. It listed the cost of the first supply run, $273.49, written in sharp blue ink. Page 9 detailed the $800 received from my grandmother's locket and how every single dollar of that transaction was immediately converted into medical supplies and antibiotics to fight the parvo outbreak. She saw the date of the outbreak, the drugs administered, and the final result, 50 lives saved. She looked at the section that listed the placement of the animals. Page after page of names, contact information, adoption dates, and even a follow-up check-in 6 months later. It was a complete, verifiable history of organizational skill, financial sacrifice, and enduring commitment recorded with the dedication of a lifelong accountant. She wasn't looking at an emotional plea anymore. She was looking at the logistics of a covert, successful, 6-month-long rescue operation run by the woman she had just judged too old to manage one dog. I closed the book quietly. I didn't keep this to brag, Sarah. I kept it because I knew the day would come when society would dismiss my capacity based on my age. You saw a number, 72. I showed you a commitment that lasted 30 years. You questioned my predictable future, but my past proves I'm the most reliable person here. Sarah's professional mask completely shattered. She didn't offer a rehearsed apology. She offered genuine remorse. Tears welled up in her eyes. Mrs. Evelyn, I have never seen anything like this. We are so focused on paperwork and projections, we forget that competence doesn't expire. She quickly pulled the application back. I am so profoundly sorry. Not only is Max approved, but I honestly believe you are the only person who should take him home. The resolution wasn't dramatic shouting or a furious confrontation. It was quiet, simple, and deeply human. Max was led out of his kennel. He didn't jump or bark. He simply walked straight over, leaned against my leg, and sighed. A deep, weary sigh of relief. We signed the final paperwork. The word denied was never stamped. Instead, Sarah wrote approved with honors and smiled for the first time. As I walked Max out the door, the final piece of the story clicked into place. I had saved 52 lives 3 decades ago, and the universe had kept that secret for me, preserving the evidence until the exact moment I needed to save the 53rd, the rescue dog Max, and perhaps my own sense of self-worth. The true measure of a person's capability isn't their age, their title, or their resume. It's the quiet commitments they make when no one is watching. It's the strength you forge in the dark, in moments of crisis, not the strength you display in daylight. My secret was a heavy burden, but in the end, it became my most valuable asset. It was the proof that wisdom is forged through endurance and that the seniors in your life often carry a history of resilience you cannot even imagine. Never mistake quietness for weakness. Never mistake age for incapacity. If this story resonated with you, if you know someone who embodies that quiet, unacknowledged strength, hit that subscribe button and join our community. Tell me in the comments below, what secret strength have you witnessed in an older person that the world often ignores? Your stories help us challenge the stereotype. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm Evelyn, and Max and I wish you all the best.